So a little bit about Shiva. Shiva is the Executive Director and CISO of the Computer Forensic and Security Institute, CFSI, which specializes in penetration testing, forensics, and advanced cybersecurity training. He is a certified cybersecurity and forensics investigator and has trained hundreds in-person training classes in the field of penetration testing, cybersecurity, forensics, and networking throughout the Caribbean over the past 16 years. He is currently partnered with international companies including Fujitsu as a lead trainer for advanced cybersecurity courses facilitated by CFSI. So with that, I hand the stage over to Shiva. Shiva, over to you.
Thanks, Aditya. Can you all hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. All clear.
Okay, great. First of all, let me thank Rocheston for inviting me. It's an honor to share the stage with all these prestigious speakers. Also, thanks to Benasia Enterprises of Trinidad. They are the official distributors for Rocheston courses, and my company as well, CFSI. We usually deal in a lot of cybersecurity training. I'm very excited to say that we will be offering Rocheston courses, the RCCE and RCCI and so on, because we've looked through this content and it's some amazing content. So thanks for everyone, Haja especially, for having me here. Aditya, great moderation. Okay, so my talk today is going to be on or about incident response and forensic analysis. It's a bit of a technical presentation, but before we actually get to the technical parts, what we'll be doing is running through a bit of incident response and forensic analysis. Thanks to Rama for the introduction there to penetration testing and so on, because that's actually one of the services that we offer. So hi, Rocheston Reinvent. My name is Shiva and I hack stuff, of course, with permission. We don't just hack and so on, that's illegal. But yeah, companies actually require this service. It's a very important service that we offer worldwide. Any penetration tester, as Rama would have said, this should be done every 6 months. In today's world, we read about so many different cyber attacks, so many threats, so many new vulnerabilities every single day. If you just go to Google and search for cybersecurity news, for example, every day, I'm sure all of you have probably seen maybe 10, maybe 20, but per month, yeah, there are a lot of threats. So yeah, I'm a cybersecurity professional, penetration tester, forensics investigator, and the owner of CFSI, located in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. I've been in this field for quite some time, maybe more than 2 decades. I've written 3 books, 1 on penetration testing, 2 on forensics with Kali Linux and so on, most recent being the 2nd edition. So you all can feel free to reach out at me at any point in time if you need advice, if you'd like advice on Rocheston courses as well. It's up to you. So here are some of the topics that we'll be discussing today, right? We want to look at what exactly is digital forensics, some examples, what does digital forensics apply to? Aditya went ahead previously to explain some of the teams that we would have, but more along the lines of penetration testing. But in the world of forensics as well, we also have certain types of teams. Just like in penetration testing, we would have had the black box type testing, the white box, and the gray box, and so on. Before Rama, I believe we had Hema, and she mentioned some very good guidelines, practices, and frameworks. So what we will do is also look at some best practices and frameworks that should guide you, at least, on your way to actually performing professional forensics, right? We want to look at something interesting called anti-forensics as well, because forensics is not easy. It's very time-consuming. You need to have a lot of patience. You need a particular skill set as well in order to do forensics. So usually, we have the networking professionals, and then from there, you would escalate to security, cybersecurity, and then even above that, you have forensics. So it's a very niche skill set, and there aren't many professional digital cyber forensics professionals when compared to actual penetration testing and cybersecurity professionals in general. We want to look at some attacks as well. I'm going to explain to you about maybe some of the attacks that could be carried out, what skill sets is involved. Attacks are no longer just software-based. We have actual hacking hardware that's readily available that you can use to carry out attacks. So considering all of these aspects, this is where we need to have incident response policies, frameworks in place. We need to follow best practices, and even the tools that we use for forensics and incident response, data acquisition, and so on. We need to make sure that these tools are tested in advance and work well. Right, so we'll be covering some of that. This is where the technical part comes in. We'll be looking at some memory forensics tools, some acquisition tools, ransomware, artifact analysis, a bit of network forensics, and lastly, I added this slide recently, which is cybersecurity and your mental health, because I believe it was the first day that Jyoti Duga, she did a presentation on cyber tranquility, which I thought was amazing. Because the world in general does not understand sometimes how stressful it can be to be a cybersecurity professional. We would know as cybersecurity professionals, that it takes a lot of time and research and skill, years of building. So we want to touch on that as well, right? So let's get started, right? So first things first, what is digital forensics, right? Digital forensics simply involves the preservation, acquisition, documentation, very importantly, analysis, and also interpretation of evidence from various devices and storage media. When you think about the types of technology that we have now compared to, let's say, 10, 15 years ago, it's amazing, right? Especially with IoT, Internet of Things devices. I'm sure a lot of you all may have Alexa devices or Android boxes. Even refrigerators, microwaves, there are smart cars. They are everything pretty much is smart these days, and everything is automated. But this is where it gets interesting, because we need to know if these things are secured and also what happens to the data in transit, right? Because forensics is not only limited to laptops, desktops, tablets, mobile devices, but it also extends to something very important called data in transit, which is of high value, as we very well know in these times. That data is actually transmitted across public or private networks. So as Hema as well spoke about VPNs and so on, VPNs and so on, it's pretty important these days. We need to know, that our data is secure, because we have a lot of interception that can take place. We also have laws for interception where government agencies and so on, they can legally intercept everything. So, I mean, that's an issue by itself. But on the whole of securing your devices, your Wi-Fi access in particular, personally, I never use Wi-Fi hotspots, never ever. But that's because I know what I am capable of as a penetration tester and a forensics investigator. So the types of digital forensics investigations, like I said, they can apply to pretty much anything that you can think about where technology is concerned. Mobile devices, endpoint devices, servers, infrastructure forensics, even printers and televisions. The reason why I included printers and televisions is because in a bit of personal experiences, while I can't call the company names due to non-disclosure agreements, as was discussed previously by Rama, I've had some interesting cases in forensics, one being a botnet. So I was called in to do some forensics analysis on a local college, and they were being blacklisted. Their email in particular was being blacklisted by Spamhaus, and it was troublesome to send email, receive email. So we did a scan of the entire network. We found nothing. We did vulnerability assessments. We did random checks. We had not a clue. Eventually, we ran some different software, and we saw a lot of multicast traffic, right? Which is basically a small subnet with a group connecting, and not connecting really, but communicating within a small group apart from the local area network. And when we looked at the MAC addresses of these devices, we realized that they were actually the printers that were communicating with each other. So it was actually part of the Zeus botnet that took advantage of an exploit called it's an Apple Talk type exploit that runs on most printers for communications and so on, running on port 5354, I believe. But yeah, it was amazing to actually see that the printers were compromised, and even if we would shut off one printer, another printer would actually start. So they were all linked, connected together, and reporting back to a command and control center using the Zeus botnet, interestingly enough. With the television, I did some work for a bank as well, and they as well were experiencing DOS attacks. So same thing, we decided to scan, we decided to do a vulnerability assessment just to see what data we could collect. And we ran some tools, we looked at multicast traffic. And again, when we saw the multicast traffic, immediately, of course, based on my past experience, I realized that it could be a similar scenario to the printers. What we realized when we looked at the MAC addresses, they were Samsung TVs. The Samsung TVs were in the lobby areas, and they were connected to the network. They were also connected to the internet because these TVs were provided by a marketing company to display ads and so on in the lobby area. And after investigating the TVs and looking at the firmware and the versions of the apps, we realized that some of the apps were outdated and they did not update. And because of this, hackers were able to remotely connect and exploit those apps, and then compromise the entire network and perform denial of service attacks, right? So they immediately had to shut off TVs and so on. So it's a pretty interesting world out there in digital forensics. It doesn't apply only to data recovery. Data recovery, yes, we can look at hard drives and so on, which used to be pretty simple, but now with everything being solid state drives, and chips without moving parts like the MMC chips and what have you, SD cards and whatnot, it's a bit tricky, especially with the SSD, because when you think about it, an SSD is like a large flash drive. So it's no longer a case where we have platters and mechanical parts. The whole point of a solid state drive is that it's in a constant solid state. There are no moving parts. The problem with that is that the newer technology on solid state drives, usually once you delete something, is incredibly hard to recover. We can do malware, ransomware investigations in forensics. There are different types: network forensics, email forensics. Maybe if someone has sent a threatening email, we inspect the headers. Of course, there are barriers, because if it was sent from emails such as Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail, there are barriers, meaning that if you ever tried to investigate and analyze the email headers, it usually just, for privacy reasons and privacy laws, it stops at the actual providers like Google and Yahoo, Hotmail, Microsoft, who have you. Corporate espionage is something that, and employee sabotage, it is real, because you have to take into consideration there are a lot of disgruntled employees for whatever reason, be it maybe they don't see eye to eye with bosses, other employees, they just don't like what the company has done recently. Maybe perhaps in times of work from home, with these policies, you'll find that a lot of persons, I've gotten a lot of emails from people about burnout and overwork, because we're no longer at the office possibly 8 to 4, we're at home, and some companies, they do tend to take advantage of that and say, okay, well, you should be grateful to have a job, so just work when we email you, whenever we email you, and so on. So some of these things we have to look at also. Social media, everyone uses social media these days. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. TikTok recently, as we saw, is very vulnerable. And then, of course, we have the IoT forensics, which is pretty a pretty big concern that we should all be looking at, because remember, these are devices that we bring into our personal networks, bring into our homes. Even though we have bring your own device, BYOD policies, is anyone enforcing these policies? How are we going about enforcing these policies as well? All right, so let's go ahead. So to go a little further, Rama previously mentioned that we had different types of penetration testing. Penetration testers would fall into the red team. So the red teams would provide vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, and are usually done by a team of very highly skilled offensive cybersecurity professionals. So for example, if you've done training with Rocheston for the RCCE and the penetration testing and further on, I mean, Rocheston has some excellent courses, I really do admit, right? It would prepare you for these. Of course, you would have to do a lot of work on your own. For example, a lot of my students, I usually tell them that you have to actually build your own labs and practice. Go to VulnHub and these places. There's so many vulnerable operating systems that are built for us to practice on in a safe environment. So that's a red team. So the red team is more about penetration testing, which we're not focusing on this chat. We're more going to focus on blue teams and purple teams. So the blue teams, incident responders, forensic investigators, professionals, and so on, that would more deal on the defensive side. So whereas the red team is offensive, the blue team is defensive. And recently, within the past year or two, you may have heard about a purple team. So a purple team is actually a pretty great balance of where you would like to be as a cybersecurity professional, because it's a mixture of the offensive and defensive skill sets. The difference between the purple team and the red team in particular is that the red team may not alert you as to what types of attacks are being carried out, apart from denial of service attacks and DDoS attacks, which could actually impact production and the environment and your infrastructure. Right, whereas on a purple team, yes, we take the approach of penetration testing, but it's more of a planned approach so that you would know exactly, okay, we're going to carry out this particular attack, and this is the way we want to respond to it. So you can actually do an entire simulated response on an attack and a response. So it's simple. It's similar actually to a fire drill, for example, where somebody would pull the alarm, and you would determine how to respond and who exactly is supposed to respond first. So this is what will carry us into incident response and first responders. It's pretty similar to what we have in the real world. Before we get into some of this, so what we have to abide by are specific best practices. There are frameworks, there are guidelines, you may want to look it up, but as for standard practices, formal practices and procedures, this is something you may have to put together yourself, because remember, forensics itself, as I've put on the slide here, forensics is a science. Digital forensics, being relatively new as well, requires one to follow appropriate best practices and procedures. Just like you would have in any crime scene. Right? If there is a crime scene, remember, we're not supposed to go and touch anything or be even within a certain perimeter or proximity, because then we could possibly compromise the investigation, and only the professionals, if there is a crime scene, remember, you may have police and so on at the scene, first of all, keeping people away and quarantining that area. Right? So that's why we need to follow certain best practices in particular. So we'll be talking about practices. I'll direct you all to a couple best practices papers from NIST and CREST and so on, which are pretty relevant, I have to say. But the second point there, the main purpose of adhering to best practices set by organizations specializing in digital forensics and incident response, and this is the key part here, is to maintain the integrity of the evidence for the duration of the investigation. And notice that last part there says integrity of the evidence for the duration, the entire duration of the evidence. So even from data acquisition, whether you have to document, label, and collect different devices at a particular scene, or perhaps maybe just acquire hard drives. And when I say acquire a hard drive, I mean using forensics best practice, actually making a bitstream copy of that hard drive or flash drive or any storage device actually. A bitstream copy is totally different from an ordinary copy where you would copy and paste or just drag and drop. A bitstream copy copies every single bit inside that particular piece of storage medium, because there are lots of pieces of data inside storage media that are not seen by operating systems. Right, so we need to acquire all of this information, all of this data, every single bit, which is why we would be using as a best practice to always do a bit stream or bit by bit copy. moving on with best practice as well. Like I've said, there exists a lot of guidelines and methodologies out there that you can follow to ensure that we follow the proper incident response procedures, proper examination, handling, investigation. And what we would like to achieve is that everything is forensically sound. Forensically sound means that it is in accordance with forensic and incident response best practices and guidelines. Two examples that I've listed here are the ACPO's Good Practice Guide for Digital Evidence. I'm assuming the slides and videos would be shared with you all. Feel free to take pictures of your screens and screenshot as we go along. I'll also send my email address at the end of it, for which you all can probably contact me, if not Aditya directly for these. And there's the SWGDE best practice for computer forensics. So we'll go into this a bit more, especially the SWGDE, because the ACPO is a bit dated. The SWGDE, they usually have a lot more documents that are current. So whether it be on laptops, desktop servers, but they also have for portable devices and mobile devices as well, which is something that we need to consider, because these days you can do pretty much the same exact work on your cell phone or your mobile phone tablets as you would be able to on a laptop, because for example, my mobile phone has possibly an octa-core processor with 128 gigabytes of storage, 8 gigabytes of RAM. So it is its own laptop, I guess you can say, by its own right. So the SWGDE, which is the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence, they actually have a dedicated site with all documents listed for the best practices for computer forensics, and they shed light on a lot of areas that are very important to any cybersecurity professional, but especially to incident responders and digital forensics professionals. There are papers and best practices on evidence collection and acquisition. And if actually you head over to these sites, you realize that the guidelines, they are very short compared to other documents and so on. Some of them are possibly 8 to 10 pages, but the points are listed in bulleted form. They are very easy to follow. Of course, reading these alone will not make you into a cybersecurity professional. However, it can help you in developing your own policies as an employee, as a consultant, as a business owner, so that you would have some sort of incident response policy or framework in place, right? Remember, this would go hand in hand with business continuity as well. So if a threat is actually detected, something happens, how do we actually respond to it? What are the steps for mitigation? So the SWGDE, they have a lot of documents that you can use in building your own response policies, I guess. Right? There's a difference between investigating devices that are powered on and powered off. As cybersecurity professionals, you of course would need to know a little of this. You try to have as little interaction with the evidence. So for example, if we're dealing with a desktop, and the desktop is off, but you need to perform forensic acquisition and so on, you should not allow anyone or yourself try to go ahead and put on that desktop or even that laptop without any good reason. Because if you're familiar with random access memory and the booting of a computer, we know that a lot of things happen. And RAM is also affected. The RAM storing previous information could very well be erased, right? So we have special tools and hardware, special practices, procedures, formal guidelines that we should actually follow. The analysis is where the tools would come in. There isn't any one specific tool that you should use. I actually recommend using 2 to 3 different tools. Reason being is that in the purpose of maintaining the integrity of not just the evidence, but the findings, the reason for using more than one tool is that you should use several tools which should actually give you the same result. So that way you can tell, okay, my findings are actually accurate, especially if this is something that has to go to court. Reports as well, something that you have to focus on. It's very important to know how to create your reports, formal reports. Remember to, just like with penetration testing, the reports are actually, well, they do contain sensitive information. about maybe what threat occurred, who was involved. So these are things that should be encrypted and delivered in PDF, possibly with a password. You obviously should not send the password in the email. Maybe you should have a separate email or call them directly and let them know what the password is. Okay, so before we start off, there's a question, and feel free to go ahead and type in the chat as well. So this question, the reason why I wanted to put this question is just sort of to put things in perspective. So let's start off by answering this question. If there were to be an accident involving perhaps 2 or more vehicles, what would take place, or who would respond? I'm sure we've all seen some sort of accident, whether it be in front of us live on the roads. Who are usually the first people to respond to it, or anyone around? So this would apply to an actual breach that takes place inside the organization, or even on your home. You can actually do your own type of forensics. All right, so if there is something that actually takes place, usually, first of all, maybe you may have some good Samaritans that might come out to help. So you have the pedestrians or the bystanders, other people that may be passing in their cars if it's safe for them to stop and maybe lend a helping hand. But at some point, I'm pretty sure someone is going to call the protective services, which would include the police, the ambulance, the paramedics. So apart from the pedestrians, bystanders, the police, paramedics, basically your protective services, these personnel that would be the official ones to respond, they are the first responders. So first responders are very important in incident response and digital forensics because they are the first ones that would be alerted to attend to, or may actually be the ones to notice that something may have occurred. So this is why it's important to have some sort of incident response plan or incident response policy where you can identify certain persons in various roles that would be able to respond to any sort of incident that takes place. And these first responders, they don't actually have to be IT people. They just need to be the ones, just like when we have a fire drill, for example, we have perhaps fire wardens and fire marshals. They may not be firemen and firewomen, but they would know the procedures, maybe, okay, to get everyone out of this particular area in an orderly fashion, isolate this area, who they should contact, fire services, alert management, in what order they should do so. But also in a fire drill, remember the entire point of it is actually to preserve life. Same way in digital forensics and incident response, it's actually to preserve the evidence and maintain the integrity of the evidence. So on that note, incident response is about evidence preservation. Preserving evidence, it does not only begin at the acquisition of data, but as early on as the physical viewing of a suspect device or even the alert to a breach that has taken place. And as I mentioned previously, there needs to be some sort of structured approach to the breach or the crime in the same manner that you would with an actual crime that was taken. For example, there's a crime that was taken and the police would come, they would provide the tape and tell everyone, please don't cross this area because they may contaminate or tamper with the evidence, for example. In the same way, it should actually be given that same sort of treatment. Even if it's something very tiny, it's good to get into that practice and follow these formal procedures. So in the same way, a person makes a call to the emergency services, who then dispatches the police, the fire services, the ambulance personnel, along with other first responders who may have to attend to the scene. They can then escalate it. So we could escalate it to managers, supervisors, and so on. In the same way that at an actual crime scene, it would be escalated to the FBI, the CIA, the governing bodies within your respective countries. So there needs to be a similar chain of command when dealing with reports that require digital investigation. And remember, even if it's informal, we still try to keep it as professional as possible. One of the many reasons for doing so in particular, one reason is for the documentation purposes. Because while everything is happening, you should have someone that is documenting each and every step, because of course this will be put in a report, and it should also be placed in a follow-up or post-up documentation memo or report that says, okay, well, these were the actual procedures, and this should be filed away so that for future reference, we could easily revisit what has actually taken place at that point in time with the past incident and hopefully apply it to this future incident. And that way you build on your incident response framework or policies, even guidelines if you so wish. So your first responder or first responders are actually, it could be a person, it could be several people. So, but in general, even if it's just one person, you or someone in your organization, it's someone that usually has some sort of knowledge and understanding of the workings of devices, networks, as well as the IT infrastructure in the organization. Now, even though they have an understanding of the devices and networks, it doesn't mean that they have to be the technical help desk or administrators or the IT manager. It could be anyone that is actually there and they are familiar with the environment. So familiarity with the environment and the network and the services inside the network. For example, what applications you may offer to clients, whether it's web applications, portals, maybe you know that everything is stored perhaps in the cloud and not on-site, infrastructure. They don't have to know if it's Cisco or Fortinet or Palo Alto or the many of them that we have out there, but at least if they know, okay, maybe this person is in charge of the web application portals, the IT manager may know more about the infrastructure and the routers. So the first responder does not have to be technical, but they would, just like a fire warden or fire marshal, they would have to know who are the ones that would then have to be contacted. Right, and like I said, they don't have to be technical, but they could be help desk technicians, the systems administrators, all the way up to the IT managers and so on. So the higher up you go, of course, it's expected that you have more knowledge in cybersecurity and so on. But forensics and incident response is actually a skill set on its own, as I mentioned. So you need to have someone that is properly trained and also, if possible, certified. Right, like I mentioned previously, Rocheston has the RCCI certification for forensics that you can look into. So some of the duties of the first responders would be to respond to the scene, of course, as the name suggests, because they are first responders. It is very important to document the scene, especially if it's a room. You want to go in a circular fashion, using the center of the room as a focal point, because we don't want to, if we know that a breach has occurred, at a particular site, maybe on a particular machine, a laptop or a desktop, we don't just want to only focus on that area or that desk. We want to also look at the entire room, because remember, we have things to consider such as rogue access points, as personal hotspot modems, cameras. Not only that, but throughout a room, for example, in cybercrime investigations, you'll find that police departments as well. I'm sure you've seen any movies or series, NCIS, CSI, and whatnot. And they do professional investigations by marking off everything in the room that could possibly assist. It doesn't mean that you have to go ahead and get a warrant and, especially if it's in a working environment, and go ahead and tag and bag, as we say, everything inside the room. But sometimes you may have external drives, flash drives, maybe reading material, printed material, inside the room. So that's why we usually try to document everything. And sometimes we even crawl up into the ceiling to see where the network cables are run. Also, to those of you who may be familiar with building PCs, laptops, using Raspberry Pis as well, you'll know that we don't use traditional form factors anymore for a computer, because a computer, let's say for a desktop, yes, we have a case to provide maybe proper cooling and so on, but you can actually put a motherboard with the RAM and the processor and the cables. You can build a box, for example. You can put it in a cardboard box. You can put it in your something that came in a package from Amazon or eBay or wherever, Alibaba, something like that. So it doesn't have to be inside of and because of the Raspberry Pi and the Arduino and all these smaller devices, they maybe half the size of a cell phone, perhaps, and they could be hidden anywhere. So this, again, is another reason why you need to fully document everything. The area should be quarantined. If it's a desktop, if it's a desk environment, at least let's tape it off, let staff know no access to this machine, this computer, this profile that could be logged into on other machines. The main reason because of that is, again, we go back to the preservation of evidence and maintaining the integrity of the investigation, because data is very volatile, especially if the machine is on or the device is on. Remember, whatever you are the person was currently working on, all of that is actually stored in RAM or perhaps on a paging file located out in a small area on the hard disk. And especially the RAM and the paging file, the content within is actually highly volatile, meaning that once power is lost to the device, that's it, it's gone. And it's very, very useful information, because when we skip across to using volatility for memory forensics, I'll explain a little bit more about it and we'll see why. But there is something that we have to consider called the order of volatility, which we will look at, right? But according to the last point that I have on the slide here, preserving and packaging evidence for transportation, ensuring the use of chain of custody forms. So, for example, it is good to follow this practice where you can find a chain of custody form online and print it out and use it as a template for your organization. It's just a form with the names of the person. There are certain tables with, for example, you have the name of the persons that the device is being handed over to. So it's being handed over from me, for example, from Shiva to my friend Alex, to my friend Damien, to my friend Mayank, to my friend Ryan, to my friend Deodat, etc. It goes on and on. But whoever it goes to, they have to sign for it, and they have to, for example, state reasons for handing over, the date, the time, their ID, a contact number. So in this way as well, we preserve evidence and also the integrity, again, of the investigation by using the chain of custody forms. Which, again, as I said, you can find templates anywhere online by just Googling chain of custody forms. So as I mentioned, we have the order of volatility, which we have to pay particular focus to. The SWGDE and all of these organizations, they do make mention of the order of volatility. So when collecting evidence, we should keep in mind the volatility of data. Data can be easily lost or destroyed. As such, when collecting data, a well-documented and common best practice would be to collect evidence in the order of most volatile to least volatile. So most volatile meaning that data that is likely to disappear quite easily, compared to least volatile, which means that data is stored somewhere for a long time, if not permanently. For example, external hard drives and so on. Those would be least volatile, right? So as listed by the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence, or the SWGDE again, Capture of Live Systems document, which is an actual document and paper on their website that you can visit. Excuse me. It lists the order of volatility from most to least volatile and crucial as follows. So the random access memory, the actual memory, that is most volatile, because inside of there you will find everything that a person was working on that machine. It may not have been that the person was locally at that machine, because remember, we have a lot of remote attacks taking place as well. So it will show the running processes, the users, perhaps even have content about websites that were accessed, network connections, even things that may have been printed or scanned. So pretty much remember, that's the entire point of RAM. Whatever you are working on in this current situation while you've been logged on is actually stored in RAM, and the paging file, which is this tiny area on the hard disk drive that emulates RAM, sort of to speed up things and give you easier access to programs, etc. So from RAM, basically go down to storage media. And at this point, documentation is very important. Usually what I do is that I would set up my phone or camera on a tripod if working on a system. So that way, while I work on a system, I am documenting it, and I can go back at a later point and then make my notes and type out my notes, take screenshots of the actual video. Just a tip there in case for anyone that's considering this. You should always record. You can also have a recording device, or while you are making your video, you can talk and make notes as you go along as well. Again, it all goes back to data preservation and integrity of the evidence. Because, for example, if the evidence is tampered with by someone trying to power on, power off, or having to install programs, or unknowingly, of course, things happen. You will be tampering. But again, this is where video recording of the investigation is actually quite important. Because for forensic examination, incident response, sometimes we have no choice but to install certain tools, software that we will have to run, for example, to do acquisition of the memory, the actual RAM, to do data acquisition on a laptop or device, whatever it may be. The user may not have these tools there already, so you as an investigator will have to go now and install a tool of choice to acquire this evidence and acquire the RAM and acquire the hard drive and so on. But that is okay as long as it's properly documented and best procedures are followed. And in particular, you don't you try not to do anything that will leave sort of a large footprint on the machine at the time of investigation. All right, so following the formal procedures and best practices, they are key in any investigation because they ensure the integrity of the investigation by providing proof of data authenticity and preservation of the original evidence and documentation. So yeah, use your cameras, take photos. You can have someone there with you, perhaps even discussing it with you while you are. It depends, of course. This has to be a trusted cybersecurity colleague as well, or perhaps someone who, if you're a consultant and is called to the scene, maybe you are with the IT managers on HR and stuff, and you perhaps are asking questions because these people actually have to be interviewed. Because you need as much information as you could get about the scenario, about the breach, about the environment to actually be able to do proper analysis and then put this in a report, a formal report that will then be reported to your employers or contractors, as the case may be. So to maintain the evidence integrity, to provide proof that once the evidence has been acquired, so for example, the breach has occurred and we're at the laptop in particular, and we know that we want to acquire the everything on what was going on at that point in time. So we want to acquire the RAM. We also want to acquire certain files, certain folders, maybe partitions, maybe the entire hard drive, right? We have to maintain the evidence integrity throughout. So what we use would be hashes, which are just the algorithms that once run against the files, folders, whatever we have acquired, forensically acquired, that is. It would produce a cryptographic hash. Previously, we would have used older hashes like MD5, Message Digest, and so on, but those are easy to tamper with. So you want to use something strong, such as SHA. SHA-1 is fine, but I'd recommend going with something like Secure Hash Algorithm 256, if not 512. The only issue that you may have if you go with a higher strength algorithm, such as the SHA 512, is that it would take a lot of time because like I have written there, the cryptographic hash, such as the SHA Secure Hash Algorithm 256, is one that is run against data to create a unique output, which can be repeated to produce the same output time and time again. So once you have your forensic copy of the original evidence, what you should do is actually make multiple copies. So you never have to work with the original device and the original evidence after that point. What should happen, though, is that once the evidence is acquired and a hash has been made, for the purposes of integrity, especially if it has to go to court and is examined by another party, the output of that cryptographic hash should actually be exactly the same as it was when you created it and copied did a forensic acquisition, I should say, of the evidence. So in this way, at any point in time, anyone else could go ahead and create a hash, and it should reflect the exact same string of characters. If an entire hard drive, let's say a 2 terabyte hard drive, you run the SHA-256 against that entire 2 terabyte hard drive. If you go inside that hard drive thereafter and perhaps open a text file and just remove a dot or one single character, the string of characters, the output that was produced initially, it is going to be totally different. It is going to change entirely. And investigators are going to know, cybersecurity professionals are going to know that something was tampered with on the original evidence. So one of the main ways that we use, or not use, but one of the main ways that we perform this is to use a variety of tools. A lot of the tools, especially commercial tools and so on, but there are a lot of open source tools out there that we will look into. Sorry, they do have hashing functions built into them automatically, right? So you don't have to do separate tools, but it depends on which tools you decide to use. So for incident response procedures, like I said, we have policies. As I've been saying, you have to follow some sort of best practice and procedure. To respond, you need guidelines showing you how to respond to, document, preserve, and acquire evidence, as well as analyze and properly store the evidence. There are formal procedures for storing evidence as well, because remember, they are susceptible to radio frequency interference, electrical magnetic interference. There's even light frequency interference that a lot of people don't know about. And not only that, but heat, moisture, static electricity, all of these things have to be dealt with. And there's absolutely no reason to reinvent the wheel. What we look at is a couple of frameworks here that I've just made mention of in these slides. So NIST, as we might be familiar with, the National Institute of Science and Technologies in the US, their special guidelines and papers 861 R2. It's about 90 pages long. It's very in-depth and detailed. So it's really a great guideline for you to work with. And I just wanted to just make note of the 4 steps that they have for forensic investigations and incident response, which is preparation, detection, analysis, containment, and post-incident. So you can actually break up your investigation or your incident response into these 4 main parts here, and then break it down even further as you go along. So for documentation purposes, developing policies and framework, this is actually a really great guideline. There's also another, the CREST Cybersecurity Incident Response Guide. This was taken from the website at crestapproved.org that you could go to and actually download these guides for free, right? And their methodology is similar. Whereas the NIST had 4, they have 3, which is where you prepare, respond, and follow up. Essentially, that is what incident response is about. The forensic analysis would go a lot deeper, which is what we're about to get into, right? So we're about to get into the more technical part of it at this point in time. But before we do, there's a question that I have here for you all. Again, feel free, although I can't see the chat box at this time, to type in the chat box, and I will have a look at them afterwards if you have any questions. And of course, Aditya will provide. Do policies and cybersecurity frameworks, do they actually offer any level of protection? The reason why I asked this is because we have a lot of cybersecurity professionals that follow a lot of theory. So you'd find that in companies, we want a lot of policies, we want a lot of framework, we want proper procedures, we want this, we want that. And a lot of them that you will find, personnel that deal with policies, they may not actually have the technical know-how and the technical ability to perform investigations or even begin an investigation. So do they provide any sort of protection at all? Well, the answer, unless monitored and enforced, in my personal experience and opinion, no. Because you can have terabytes and petabytes, exabytes of policies and frameworks, but are they being followed? Is there a department? Is there a person that would do routine checks? Is anything? Are your staff aware of these policies and procedures, or do you just drop an entire large folder full of policies or direct them to a shared folder, shared drive with hundreds of policies and say, okay, you need to familiarize yourself with these things? It doesn't work like that. You need to be proactive and you need to be active in training staff, making staff aware these policies and procedures, and importantly to the incident response procedures. So if they determine that there may have been a breach, for example, we have so many phishing attacks taking place, especially during this time of COVID, with people working from home, and they may not be afforded the same security as you would have in an enterprise level environment, especially if they are not using VPNs to connect to work. So perhaps they may have clicked on a phishing email and maybe have downloaded something to their personal machines. So if they notice something on their machines, do they now contact, who do they contact? So again, we can see how incident response actually plays into this. Now, there are a lot of incident response and forensics. It is very time consuming. There are a lot of things to consider. We have to consider anti-forensics, our drives. When we decide to do acquisition, if someone brings a laptop or desktop to you and says, okay, we need work on this, or we need this done, or we suspect maybe an employee was doing something. I did some work for an energy company last year, and they had a case like that based on employees, but who they may have suspected of something happening. Which actually was not the case, but we had to actually go through a lot of BitLocker and encryption, such as Veracrypt. We have mobile device encryption. If you're trying to do encryption on mobile devices, is it locked? Will trying to unlock then render device bricked, as we usually say. Also, it's not just cut and clear about tracing from point A to point B anymore, because people use offline anonymity, online and offline anonymity, such as proxy chains, VPNs, the Tor browser, which is supposed to provide some level of anonymity online, but maybe more so with VPNs. And a lot of the VPN services out there, they claim to not provide any logs as well. So even if a crime has been committed, it's a bit difficult, where you will have to get law enforcement involved. What about if someone is a dedicated hacker and they have been hired by a competing organization to get into yours? They can easily go out and buy disposable equipment, such as USB network interface cards, the Raspberry Pi, Wi-Fi hotspots, and there are readily available portable hacking tools and devices that people can easily bring into your network and set up without you even knowing, which is why you have to be proactive and need to perform scans daily. So this brings the question to what sort of knowledge, what level of skill does it take to execute a cyber attack? Does it take any of these? Do you need super advanced programming knowledge? Do you need an in-depth understanding of networks and security? Do you need specific practical skills, right, in offensive security, such as what is offered in the RCCE certification course with Rocheston? Do you need immediate Google searching skills with the ability to learn on the fly? Do you need all of the above? It depends, right? It all depends on what is being attacked and the level of protection afforded to the resources and assets being attacked. Sure, you may have a firewall with IPS multi-factor, which is intrusion protection, intrusion detection, multi-factor authentication. You have lots of policies, frameworks, antivirus, anti-malware subscriptions. You've applied all the latest patches, but what about your human resources? Some people have actually said that the internal human resource is actually the greatest threat. Not intentionally, but maybe again because they are not aware of policies and breaches and what could possibly be the impact. Do you have internal monitoring systems? What about your bring your own device policies? Because when you think about it, devices are so tiny these days to walk inside any organization. Yes, some places actually do checks at the door and so on. But for example, there's my little device called the Wi-Fi Pineapple. This is it. This can actually carry out an entire attack on an organization where it could intercept Wi-Fi and set up a rogue access point. You have access to a web portal where you can see all information passing through connected to the rogue access point. So it is as simple as that. Someone can actually buy these devices easily. So apart from, let me just go back here quickly to this slide. Apart from the levels of what level is required, it really depends on what level of attack you want to carry out. Is it against a firewall? Is it to just collect data on the inside? But with a skilled hacker or skilled penetration tester with enough time, patience, and access to the right resources, anyone can actually become a threat. right? Even having access to Google, because of course there are a lot of forums, there are dark websites where you can actually hire hackers and so on. Programming experience is not necessarily required, as there are programs out there that anyone can use with little help from friends, Google, or taking various courses such as RCCE, next-gen hacking courses. We have the hardware hacking devices, as I just mentioned, as I just showed you all, which is the Wi-Fi Pineapple, especially when coupled with the Raspberry Pi and so on. And hackers for hire cheaper than ever, and you are usually be paid in crypto. So crypto itself could be considered, I guess, a bit of a threat to forensics, because there's no paper trail, there's no bank account information. They can be paid with Bitcoin or even Monero, which is a bit more anonymous, because whereas you may have to have accounts to buy a Bitcoin and so on, some of these crypto, you have to buy the crypto using other crypto. So you may have to use crypto or something else to buy Monero in the first place. So as a bit more on the hardware testing devices, there are a lot of them available at HackFive if you go there, or you could actually build some of these if you're into scripting and use some code from GitHub and so on, and download your own resources to your hardware. So there's the Wi-Fi Pineapple, there's the Bash Bunny, the Rubber Ducky is just a flash drive that you can actually plug into anyone's system, and it could inject payloads and steal passwords or run scripts. So basically this is what these do, and these devices are incredibly tiny. There is a newer device that was released recently called the HackFive KeyCroc, which is just plug and play, and it's a cloud. It's managed via the cloud. It's easy. It can easily detect evasion. It's very simple to configure. There's no programming aspects inside of it. What it does, however, is capture keystrokes and hijack the network, send back information to the cloud where you can then have secure access to it. It's also Wi-Fi enabled, so you don't have to actually pass through the LAN. You can have it go back to a rogue access point. So these certainly complicate things, I would say. And this is one of my little setups that I have. It's a Wi-Fi Mobile Kit. What I have there is an old OnePlus phone, which was maybe released 2013, 2014, somewhere around there, together with some Alpha equipment, which is an Alpha wireless card, and that white box that you see there is a Wi-Fi distributor. So using that metal device on top, the Yagi antenna, I can actually pick up signals up to 1 kilometer or even 2 away if I use some power injection, which then is intercepted by the Alpha card and goes into the white box, which is the Wi-Fi distributor, and that will redistribute a legitimate Wi-Fi signal into something else, thereby even creating a rogue access point. So the phone actually runs NetHunter, which is a portable version of Kali, and using NetHunter, which is connected to the rogue access point, I can now actually run programs equivalent to, if you'll be familiar with tools such as Metasploit and so on, perform man-in-the-middle attacks on networks and so on, and I can walk with all of this in a handbag, if not something even smaller. So you may be saying, my company has a firewall, so we're safe. And yes, many large companies can boast of having enterprise-level firewalls, IPS, IDS, malware protection, artificial protection, even more. But are their staff trained in cybersecurity awareness? Any of your staff disgruntled? I'm sure there must be at least one. Are scans for rogue access points and personal devices done routinely? Are all Internet of Things IoT devices monitored, assessed, or even patched, if at all possible? Right? All of these have to also be considered. Internal monitoring. We can't just leave, excuse me, the protection up to the firewall and the IDS and the antivirus, because we have so many external threats. What about physical keyloggers? What if someone attaches keyloggers to the back of desktops? Are checks even in place? So all of these should actually be part of your incident response plan before you actually get into forensics investigation. And as far as IoT devices go, I love this website. I have a paid subscription to it. It's showdown.io. And it's a search engine for IoT devices. So I usually follow Mr. Martin Roth on Twitter and Rapid7 and a lot of these companies out there. They usually release a lot of information on types of searches. So if you look at the image on the left where it says IoT password, which is the tag, that's what we search for, just like we would in a Google engine. Showdown actually is an IoT search engine. So for example, one of the things they found, interestingly enough, which is on the right side, is an industrial control system on Showdown that features flames, which grabs his attention. So remember, there are a lot of industry types of equipment, even maritime ships and boats. One of a couple of the best penetration testers I know locally, Alex Sam and Damian Boudou, they usually deal in this, and they actually found a lot of exploits locally, even in gas stations and ships out there that may have internet connections or are connected to the internet at some point for remote access management, but are not secured. So it goes back to what I was saying before. IoT devices, are they scanned? Are they checked for vulnerabilities? And more importantly, can they be patched? All right, so this is something that y'all could check out. Just go to showdown.io. You can use it for free. There's no need to actually buy a subscription. Of course, if you pay for the subscription, you get additional features like with anything else. Right, so let's have a look at some incident response and forensics tools. First of all, I just want to mention some commercial tools. I'm not going to endorse any of these and say which ones are the best. It's actually a preference. It's based on your budget. It's based on your experience. There are others. These are not the only ones. There's one that I even left out there called the Belkasoft Evidence Suite, I believe, which is pretty good. It actually tries even to do mobile forensics and recover WhatsApp chats and so on. But these are the more popular ones that you would find out there, like NCase, FResponse, FTK, which is the forensic toolkit, Magnet, X-Ways. They are all forensics. The great thing about these tools are that they are all-in-one tools. So they would all do offer more or less the same, but of course, each would have its own advantages and disadvantages. What you definitely need to look out for is if they have some of these features, which is write blocking, which is most important to acquisition. Write blocking means that when we decide to acquire forensically acquire hard drives or mobile phones or what have you, you need to make sure that you are not writing to that device. What you have to do is put it into a state of write blocking in particular, so that you do not compromise the investigation by writing to that device while it's being acquired or investigated. All right, so apart from that, bit-by-bit acquisition, evidence preservation to maintain integrity, bookmarking, password cracking, automated report generation. These are just some of the standard features that you would have. However, even though we have so many tools, if you are new to the world of incident response and digital forensics, you can go ahead and try a lot of excellent open source tools, which I will be showing you all now. This is the technical side of things. So let's have a brief look at some tools for data acquisition and RAM capture, hashing, and so on. First of all, I want to introduce a tool. I'll show a screenshot of the tool in action, which is DC3DD based on the DD command. It's more for Linux users, so I'll separate it by Linux and Windows users. Usually, you can use it on any bootable Linux type environment, if it's Kali Linux or even I assume the Rose operating system from Rocheston, which is excellent. You can go ahead and install all these tools on them easily. And to install them is pretty simple, right? It's one command: sudo apt-get install, and install DC3DD like any other Linux installation if you are familiar with these. And the usage is simple. You specify the input file, which in Linux would be the device, and for example, SDA, SDB, SDC, just like how we in Windows we would have C drive, D drive, E drive, etc. In Linux, it's listed a little different, as we can see in the blue line below, which is input file equals device SDB. That's the input file, followed by the type of hash that we would like to use to maintain the integrity of the investigation and the evidence, which is the secure hash algorithm 256. And then we simply put the output file. What do we want it to be named and in what format? So just, for example, we could put the output file there is listed as USB evidence.dd. And this is it in action. So I use this on Kali Linux, and the first command at the very top there is the input file, which is SDB, which is probably a hard drive or partition. This is where I use a much older and weaker type of algorithm, which is the MD5. But remember, as I said, it would be preferred if you all use SHA up to SHA 512, which may take a bit longer. And the process is simple. It's automated. You don't have to do anything except press enter at this point in time. And on the screenshot below there, you could just see DC3DD completed. And it's pretty simple. That's it. It creates your image for you. Another feature, which again falls into anti-forensics, is that you can actually forensically erase a drive as well using either DD or DC3DD. And the command is so very simple. On the Linux machines, you type the DC3DD command, tell it to use the wipe option, and tell it what device you want to wipe, what drive. So whether it's SDA, SDB, etc. That's it. That's all you have to do, and it will wipe it. If you repeat this multiple times, you should have a completely erased drive. However, doing so more than perhaps 6 or 7 times will actually begin to damage the drive. So even if you want to forensically wipe drives by yourself, you could run this command a couple times well. So that is the command line version of it. There's a much simpler tool for Linux called GuiMajor that's freely available, easy to download as well and install. So it's a standalone GUI acquisition tool that can be used for creating forensic images, acquiring forensic images, or even cloning drives. And the interface is pretty simple. As we can see here in the main screen in GuiMajor, pretty much all you do is click on scan. So at the top left-hand corner, there's devices, and you click on scan, and that's it. It detects the devices that are attached. So it detected Hitachi Drive, Samsung, Sony, Maxtor, Western Digital, all of them. And notice here in the screenshot, it says that acquisition running for a couple of them, and it also says finished. Once your devices are detected, you pretty much just have to right-click on the device and choose acquire, and that's it. It will ask you what type of hash you would like to create, whether it's MD5, SHA1, SHA256. It will also ask you what location you would like to save your output file. All of this would be in one simple dialog box where you're prompted for all this information. And that's it. That's GuiMajor. It's very, very simple. For Windows acquisition, there are 2 tools that I usually use, especially for partition acquisition and RAM acquisition. So you could acquire a RAM image or take a dump of the memory that's actually running at any point in time using either one of these tools. I have 2 tools listed here. One of them is FTK Imager. It is by Access Data that runs the Forensic Toolkit. This is free for download and free for use. It's very simple to use. Usually all you have to do is click on File, and here we could see, for example, down below we have capture memory, and that would capture all of the memory, including, you could also specify, I think there's a tiny area to check off in a checkbox if you want to include the paging file as well. So whether you have a desktop with 4 gigs of RAM or a server with 64 gigs of RAM, doesn't matter. This will do an excellent job for you. It will also create hashes as well. All right, so this is one of the tools for Windows that we could use for imaging memory, imaging drives, and hard drives, flash drives, storage media in general. Another tool, but specifically for RAM capture, is Belkasoft. Belkasoft is another great company with the ranks of FTK and Encase, Access Data, and so on. But there's a dedicated tool by Belkasoft that can be run directly off your flash drive, for example, if you have a special kit that you would like to put together for incident response. And this is the interface right there. It actually asks you to click on capture and browse to where you would like your memory to be dumped. And it gives you, for example, the physical size, the paging file, and you just determine where you would like your memory to be dumped to. And once your memory is dumped, or memory is dumped on a machine that you're trying to analyze, it's very easy to work with from here using tools such as Volatility, which is what we move on to now. So we're not going to go to it in depth. I will share with you all some resources after. So RAM analysis with Volatility. So once we capture the RAM in particular using either Belkasoft or Windows FTK, we can now use Volatility, which is available. It's a framework of tools put together, a lot of plugins in one, that you can use to analyze any sort of RAM dump. So whatever format, it supports various formats, but if you make a Windows dump of any machine, a Linux machine, Windows machine, Mac, phones, whatever you have, you can use volatility framework to analyze these. So volatility can be installed. It's a command line tool. There is also a graphical user interface to it, which you can install on Linux devices, but it's graphical usage on both Windows and Linux. And the screenshot there are just some of the plugins that you could run. So for example, if I look at the last one there, it says identify information for the image. So the image that they're speaking of is actually memory dump, and identification would mean did it come from a Windows XP machine, a Linux machine, a Mac machine, an Android device, etc. So there are hundreds of plugins that we could use to actually run investigations and analyze for forensics purposes. So this is a screenshot of a volatility plugin called PS List, which stands for Process List. And this is what I did against a sample file from the volatility webpage at GitHub. So if you look at the screenshot, the first line on the screenshot, that's the command that I actually had to run to get that information. So the tool is volatility, and the first option is to identify what profile you're using it on. If you don't know a profile, and that is why I mentioned the last plugin there, this image info, that plugin will actually give you this profile information and will tell you what device it came from. So you don't have to necessarily know, because sometimes you may have hundreds of these laying around for one investigation. So it's good to document all of this. And the file name that I downloaded it was just some weird name called ozap ftis. And vmem is a virtual machine. So this was actually taken from a Windows XP virtual machine. And the last command in the first line at the top of the screenshot there, it says that we're using PS List. So what volatility did for us here is actually run the processes, or show the processes, I should say, that we're running on the acquired machine, or we could say the victim or the target machine, whatever you want to call it, at that point in time. So this is why it's so very important to follow certain incident procedures, so you don't lose this type of information, because RAM is listed as number 1 in the order of volatility, right? Remember, it's most volatile. It can be lost at any point in time with restarting, rebooting, and even with power failure to the device itself, right? So this is just one plugin that I've run there called the PS List plugin. Here's another very useful one, and I've actually found traces of the WannaCry ransomware using the PS3 plugin. So the WannaCry ransomware, I'm pretty sure you all are familiar with that, where it encrypts your files and tells you that your system is now encrypted, and you would have to send a particular payment in Bitcoin, which again is untraceable. And you're never guaranteed to actually get back your information. A lot of cybercrime personnel and cybercrime police as well, they will tell you, the investigators will tell you that there is no guarantee when you sort of pay to have it decrypted, right? So it's a good idea to back up your stuff cold storage, meaning that it's not constantly connected, because there's no telling what could actually infect your hard drive and then infect your backup as well. But if you look a bit lower down, you will see that there is a listing for WannaDecryptor, which is the second to last item listed there. And right above WannaDecryptor is task scheduler.exe. So WannaDecryptor, the parent process for WannaDecryptor, is actually task scheduler. So I was able to get this information from a memory dump of a machine using volatility by running the PS3 process. And if you look at the first line of that screenshot there, it says that we've run the volatility tool. We're running it against that profile, which is the Windows XP machine. And we've analyzed that file as wcry.raw. So we actually saved, whoever created this image, I should say, actually saved the memory dump file as wcry.raw, because obviously they were testing for traces of ransomware. So this is something that you could do in a controlled environment. I'll give you all a link to a place where you could securely and safely download to virtual machines and test at your own risk. Right, so we can see here that volatility is pretty effective, and for you to actually see what happened at that point in time, it displays a lot of information. For example, here I've used the connections plugin. And the connections plugin, as you can see here, displays the local IP as well as the remote IP. So if you suspect, that someone may have been a victim of command and control or botnet, some sort of Trojan file, remote connection activity type breach happening, it will be displayed by the connections. There's also another called the ConScan, but ConScan, I believe, works with older machines. So it's pretty effective. One of the last plugins I just want to make mention of here is a timeliner plugin. This is excellent because what this will actually do is provide a step-by-step timeline of the events and processes that were actually executed and run on the system in memory at that point in time. Remember, everything is housed in the RAM and the memory. Whatever processes, whatever connections, whatever services, whatever users are logged in, everything would happen there. So you would actually get a nice timeline of events and processes running with using Volatility. Of course, all these things should be recorded, and you should make your screenshots or at least make a video of everything. Use multiple tabs if using them in Windows or Linux, as the case may be. To make things a bit easier, a lot of you all might probably be like, why didn't I show you this at first? There is a GUI to it, but it does involve a little bit of work to involve. There are a lot of tutorials. I wrote an entire chapter on Volatility and Evolve, but it's a lot easier for beginners to work with it from using Evolve, which is the web GUI, the graphical user interface, the web interface in particular, for the Volatility framework. I believe Volatility framework 2.6 is very stable. They are working on 3.0, which should be out soon, which I think is already in beta. But to the left, we will see all of these plugins. So all you have to do is click on Show or Run, or after it's run, click on Show Results. And here on the right-hand side, we have everything that we just have there. And it may be easier to work with for beginners this way, or I prefer the prior way, which is just, you type your own commands, but it's just a matter of choice and preference. But as we can see, these tools are very helpful. They show all services, the parent ID, parent process IDs, sessions. You can get a lot of information. All right, so that's one type of forensics. Let's look at network traffic analysis, which any of you all can try immediately after if you wish to. The easiest way to begin capturing network traffic. Now, of course, please do this with permission on a network. Don't go getting yourselves into trouble or doing anything illegal, because in some countries and states, doing this may be illegal and land you into some trouble, right? So be sure that you have permission to run these things. So the simplest way to begin with to capture some network traffic is to simply use a tool that most of you may be familiar with called Wireshark. If you've ever seen Wireshark in action, it may be a bit discouraging, but to actually perform a capture of network traffic across your network, your local area network, even at home, it's very simple. You install Wireshark, which could be installed on Macs, on Linux, on Windows. I think there's even a version for Android. You simply go to the menu with Capture and click on Start. Once you click on Start, it will ask you to choose, for example, if you're connected via a wired connection, Ethernet 0 or wireless, and then you should actually begin to see some traffic. Now, unless you're a seasoned professional, you will not know what these things are, and that's fine. You just need to let this run for about, let's say, if you're just testing it out, for about 10-15 minutes. And at the top, there's a red button that says to stop the capture. Once you stop the capture, you can just save it as whatever and choose a program of your choice. So there are a couple programs that we want to use. We only have about 5 more slides again before I'll take some questions. But there are a lot of tools that you could use to easily and automatically analyze network traffic in a way that's easily identifiable to anyone, from children to adults, to IT managers, to business analysts, and the stakeholders, CEOs that may not have a technical ability to read this, but it will be easy for anyone. So once you save this capture file here, it will be saved as a packet capture file with the extension .pcap. And there are so many tools that you can use to go ahead and analyze these files there as you proceed. It's very simple. A lot of the tools are free and very popular as well. So one of the first tools that I want to run through you with quickly here, right, is one called Network Miner. Network Miner, there is a free download. You can install it on Linux, and you can also install it on Windows. So what we do is just browse the file open, browse to the packet capture file that we've just created using Wireshark. And this is it. This is what it does. Instead of seeing what you saw previously, which was all this information here that's a little hard to decipher, it gives you a nice reading here with IP addresses. And if you look at the tabs at the top of these screenshots, if you can see them, that is, you can view individual files, images that were transmitted. Data in transmit is what we're referring to here. During that time that you captured the network activity, if you have messages, if you captured credentials, sessions, keywords, it's a pretty nice tool. It's free, but there's also a paid version. So if I just move ahead a bit, this is the same network miner tool. So what I've did was skipped across to the messages, and you can actually see some email accounts there, some in English, some in Spanish. And below in the credentials tab, we have some credentials here, like G Manriquez, sorry, with the passwords. We have some, excuse me, I have some anonymous logins for FTP. I don't know why someone will be using FTP. You should always use something a bit secure. But it goes to show the power of this simple tool. It's a very tiny, simple tool that you could use to analyze any PCAP file, a packet capture file that was created with network activity. So this is just one of the tools that you have there. Let's see, network. Right. So there's an online packet capture. Now, of course, this one is a bit limited because we can only do packet captures of 50 megabytes is what you're limited to in packet total. But instead of having to install something like Network Miner or actually have dedicated tools for analysis, this can actually be done online, which is one of the reasons why it's limited to only 50 megabytes. Now, you have to be careful because PCAP files can be very, very large. Some of them, if you run it in an enterprise organization for maybe half an hour, it could run into 10 gigabytes or more. So you may want to test it out and just to actually see. But what I decided to do was do a PCAP. Sorry, not actually do, but there's a site that I'll direct you all that has a lot of PCAP files for analysis, where you can try opening them with either Network Miner or upload them to Packet Total. So Packet Total is pretty simple. You just you visit packettotal.com and you upload your 50 megabit file. And the file that I downloaded, and from I think it's malware traffic analysis.com, along those lines. But you could just Google malware traffic PCAP files in particular. So it's pretty interesting. There's a lovely layout here, and you can actually see that they've broken it down, and they do give you a timeline as well with local IPs, target IPs, foreign IPs, as well as a threat rating. So we have an alert description, and we could actually see that a network Trojan was detected. So at some point in time, someone actually sent a Trojan, which was captured in the packet capture analysis, possibly using Wireshark, and it did detect it here. All right, so if you would like to learn more, I do recommend reaching out to Aditya and the Rocheston team. For those of you logging into Trinidad, you can reach out to us directly at CFSI or Benassi Enterprises, either Marlon or Cushman. They will tell you a lot more about the Rocheston certified cybercrime investigator, which you can use. There's a lot of practical inside of there if you would like to learn more and be more on the technical side of forensics and incident response. All right, you can also check it out on the website. Please reach out to us for more information. And my last talk myself about 8 years so with the new technology. Problem is that some supervisors and management, they don't understand for your success. One thing at a time, one day at a time, you go ahead. There's an excellent site called paylist.com where you can go ahead and write your own papers and publish and maybe share those on LinkedIn. But if you go to my LinkedIn, for example, my students and colleagues, they always say, you have so much, you've done so much, this and that. Yes, but I've been in the field for 20-something years. unplug. Be sure to take care of your mental health. It is exhausting, as we all know, with cybersecurity and forensics. Unplug, disconnect at least 2 hours per day, which is not included in sleep time, right? Don't watch TV. Just try and be out a bit. Stare at the sky, take a swim, take a run, take a walk, sleep, exercise, hydrate. Try to do something non-IT related if possible. I know most of all we have jobs because, well, we need to survive. But if possible, I know in the US, the UK, Canada, and whatnot, there are so many opportunities for cybercrime. Try to find a job with an understanding boss, because you will become your environment. So if you have a stressful environment to work in, you will go home stressed. If you have the options, look for different opportunities. Of course, keep your goal in sight. All these things, again, are if possible, because jobs are maybe hard to come by in some areas. I know in Trinidad, jobs are pretty tough, so we always have to be on top of things. I have so many certifications plus a master's in network security, and I still constantly have to update my skills. And last but not least, please find peaceful ways of dealing with bosses who have lots of ideas but no clue how to implement. And unfortunately, bosses may be more on the management side. They may have a lot of ideas about policies and frameworks, and they may have heard or read about certain things to implement, but they have no clue how to implement it. And they may tell you something like, okay, well, I've seen this on YouTube. Maybe you should have a look at this YouTube video and implement it. We all know, especially technical persons, that's not how it works. All right. So with that in mind, I hope everyone takes care of yourselves. And if Aditya or Naveed will join me again, if you'll have any questions, right, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, email. You can WhatsApp me if you need a copy of these slides in particular. And that's it. Thank you for attending.
Hi, Shiva.
Hi, Aditya. I can hear you now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. Great. So it was an awesome session. We could really see the passion that you have for your subject. So I think we already do have a lot of questions. I think the first question I'm going to throw at you is, how do you do digital forensics on an Apple Watch?
Ooh, that's a pretty great question. First of all, you will have to have the correct tools. Like I mentioned, there are some of them like Belkasoft Evidence Finder. Because Apple is so proprietary, you will have to usually use commercial tools. Just as how you could connect almost any electronic device, even a cable box, you can connect it to something called a JTAG cable and then import data from it. Something like that would actually have to be done. You would have to have the right equipment, the right firmware, the right tools. It is not a simple process, because also there are synchronization issues, there are password issues. So it's not cut and dry, and that is an entire class by itself.
Okay. Then you were talking about rogue access points, right?
Mm-hmm.
So someone asked a question, how about routers and gateways equipped with shield signals to protect a house from outside Wi-Fi signals, external Wi-Fi signals?
Right. So this is excellent, because some of them, especially newer access point, the high-end access points, they do come with these. I know even for commercial, I think the Cisco Meraki and Fortinet and all these guys, Checkpoint, they all have this built in. So I would recommend, especially even not just for commercial use, but even at home, you need to have this type of protection. I myself have recently upgraded. I've ordered it. It's coming in the mail. A high-end access point which does actual forensics and rogue access point detection, and it does offer the hotspot shield and all these things. So that is excellent if you decide to use those. I would recommend using them. You can even use a Raspberry Pi as an intrusion protection. You can install, for example, a pfSense firewall. There isn't any limitation to offer yourself the kind of protection that you would at a corporate level. So that's excellent actually to have, and it is highly recommended.
Okay, awesome. One more question. Someone's asked, how does digital forensics aid in investigations in a corporate setting?
It's incredibly useful in a corporate setting, because the majority of my clients that I do consultancy for, they are large corporations. And what you find is that even though they have the best of the best with the enterprise firewall, they have constant endpoint monitoring, not just at the gateway. They still need to make sure that you have certain things in place. So it's not just policies and procedures, but you may want to have, exactly as how you have a network operations center and a security operations center, you can even have an incident response operations center, or have that as part of the security operations center. It's very important, because if you detect rogue connections, it's not enough to detect. You need to analyze and you need to follow through. So this is where the forensics part of it and the forensics training would come into play. So just as we've looked at before with the WannaCry ransomware and the Trojans being detected and so on, remember we have zero-day attacks as well, which may not easily be detected by your antivirus, your firewalls, as great as they may be. So this is where you need to have your own team that is trained specifically in forensics to know not necessarily just how to react and respond, but also, most importantly, how to analyze all of these threats. So I would say it's very important in a forensic corporate setting.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How do you deal with zero-day attacks?
Yeah, zero-day attacks are a nightmare. The most you can do sometimes is try to unplug. Of course, that is not always feasible or doable in a production environment, but sometimes you will have no choice and hope that you will have some sort of failover to some other system. With zero-day attacks, it's just a lot of research, and it's actually reaching out. I have a really good friend, Roland Kisoon. He is one of the heads at Checkpoint Security. And I would usually just contact him if I need any information, because they, at Checkpoint, Palo Alto, Fortinet, a lot of the cybersecurity providers and firewall appliance providers, they have their own dedicated teams. So you can actually reach out to them directly, not just via support through your local teams. But that's the extent that I usually have to go to reach out to these security analysts within these companies and cybercrime agencies, the local CERT, international CERT, share information. Thankfully, all these organizations, they would usually within a day or two have patches, but as we've seen, we have zero-day attacks more and more at any random point in time.
Okay, thank you. So now you gave us a lot of overview about forensics when you talk about corporate settings and all of that. Someone's asked, what about cyber forensics in an educational sector?
Right. So in terms of, is it in terms of, I'm not so sure if it's in terms of teaching cyber forensics. If it is in terms of teaching cyber forensics, of course, I would recommend the RCCI, obviously the Rocheston training, because it's very, very practical. In terms of an actual educational college and so on, you have to treat that as a corporate network. Same firewalls, IPS, IDS. But as far as students go on even on personal devices, your own personal devices, you should have personal host-based intrusion detection systems, your firewall. There is a ransomware detector software that's free. I think it's called Ransom Free, if I'm not mistaken, that you can integrate with a firewall. Checkpoint has Zone Alarm. So even in a student setting, a personal setting, a student environment, or on ordinary hosts, you can go ahead and install some of these, which would aid in detection. But as for investigation, this is where you can use some of the tools that I've mentioned personally, like FTK Imager and Belkasoft and so on. These, instead of having to go with corporate solutions, it's fine if you would like to go with open source and free tools.
Okay, great. Someone's asked, can you use Wireshark to track hackers?
Yeah, you can. It depends on your level of understanding, because for every item that you have displayed in Wireshark, you may perhaps get information. It's usually color-coded. So sorry. So if you see some red or black inside of there, and you want to right-click on it and follow the TCP/IP stream, of course, what I'm talking about takes a certain level of knowledge. But while it may not actually track a hacker per se, it may still give you an idea about a network connection. Problem with that is that the hacker may have been using a VPN, so that may be a dead end. But it is still useful, just maybe not the one-stop tool for tracking a hacker.
Okay, awesome. I think we're done with the questions. So thank you so much, Shiva. That was a very, very enlightening and in-depth session. We were very happy to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Shiva.